Hi everybody, welcome to History Dad. Today we're going to continue our series on China. This is part 3, the Mao era. Okay. The Mao era really consists of the period from 1949 to 1976, the year that Mao Zedong died. It really, in my mind, needs to be broken up into 3 sections. The first section started right when they took power around 49 to when the nationalists had fled. They chased them out. It was all communist government. It was their turn to really try and make a difference, to run things. They had 2 real tasks during this period. The first was to consolidate power. They needed to get the government all functioning and functioning following the communist agenda and what their plans were. Okay, makes sense. The second aspect was what they would call thought reform. And there were 2 challenges that they were trying to address. The first is they had to convince all of the people of China that there was a better way of doing things than the ways they'd been doing it for thousands of years. All right? They had to convince them that the way you view everything is not the only way it could work. Other ways could function and would be possibly better than how things had run to this point. That actually worked pretty well for them. They were pretty good at this. People were relatively dissatisfied, and it wasn't hard to get them to really believe that things could be better for them. The second aspect, though, is they had to convince them that communism was the way to go about this. A little tougher, but they did a pretty good job. They really didn't do a bad job convincing everybody that they had the right ideas. And they did this in the course of several campaigns in the 1950s. The first one, which arguably was the most popular and maybe the most successful, was land reform. They really focused on this from 1949 to 1952. Actually, more like 1947 to 52. They started doing this right away as they were getting power. What they do is take all the land from the landlords and the capitalists and the wealthy and redistribute it amongst the poor and all the people. China was a very agriculturally focused nation at this point. So when somebody who had been working somebody else's land for years, you suddenly gave them a chunk of their own land to work for their own livelihood, this was huge. People loved this and jumped right into it wholeheartedly. Big positive response, and it worked. People were growing more food. They were living better lives than they were before. It started a big leap up in the quality of life for the people in China. The second one started in 1950 and went to 1953, and that was the campaign to suppress counter-revolutionaries. They still had a lot of people who didn't agree with them, especially when they're people that you're taking their stuff. They didn't like that. They were not with the program. So they started looking for these people, and when you got them, you would send them to be re-educated, and if they stubbornly wouldn't, you executed them. A lot of people got rounded up and re-educated and potentially executed that were not counter-revolutionaries. A lot of grudges were taken care of. There were a lot of people that got affected by this that should not have been. That's just the way it was. Okay. The next campaign they started was the new marriage law. And this one, I think this one worked really well. They allowed for the first time, really, women to get a divorce if they were unhappy in the marriage they were in. They also went a long way to trying to push back the idea, or to stop the idea of arranged marriages. What they really did was give women a lot of rights they did not have before in China. Now, arranged marriages still happened. It did. But they didn't have to happen now. They gave women some alternatives. The state would back them up if they said, I don't want to marry this person that my parents say I'm going to marry. That was allowed now. There was some social backlash maybe, but legally, the party would back them up. Now, in the case of divorce, they would try and recommend counseling. They didn't want everyone getting divorced, but if it was not reconcilable, you were allowed to get a divorce. This was very big progress for the people in China, the women. Okay, after that, they followed up with what they called the 3 antis. the antis. That was anti-corruption, anti-waste, anti-bureaucracy. 3 things that are a problem for every government and really don't help the people. They went about eliminating some of this. That was their goal, and people appreciated it. And they made some progress. That was in 1951. After that, they went after the 5 antis from 1952 to 1953. And those 5 were anti-bribery, anti-theft from state, anti-tax evasion, cheating the government, and stealing state economic information. All things they did not want people doing, and they went after these people. Okay, so they had that campaign, and that ran. Well, after that campaign, they did 3 new antis. Because the first time around, they did not feel they did a good enough job. The government was still not functioning as efficiently as they thought it should, and they were pretty sure a large chunk of it was due to corruption, waste, and bureaucracy. So they, once again, went through the government and talked to the people, and they tried to eliminate this. After that, they had another campaign in 55 to expose hidden counter-revolutionaries. Because if you slipped through the net the first time, you were definitely hiding this time. And they went back after. And then there were abuses again, just like the first time around, but the campaign went through nonetheless. After all of this, Mao and the party are feeling pretty good about things. You know, people's lives are better. They seem to be happier. There's more food than ever before. So they decide it's time to get some feedback from the people. Particularly the intellectuals, the technical classes, the really educated ones. They said, all right, how do you think we're doing? And they expected it to be really positive. Well, a lot of these people were recommending going back to some of the things before. They wanted to own their own land again. They had some complaints. They wanted some things that the Communist Party felt were still capitalist. Now, there's 2 ways of looking at this. One way would be that this was a trap. That they were just inviting people to criticize them so they could find out who was unhappy, round them up, deal with them. Okay, the other possibility here is that they genuinely were surprised when people were not all overjoyed at everything that had gone on. Either way, it led to the anti-rightist campaign of 1957 through 59, in which all of those intellectuals who disagreed, or hundreds of thousands of them, were rounded up and they were sent to thought reform to learn how to be proper communists so they could understand what was really going on and how they should be getting behind it. If it didn't work, once again, they would be executed. Okay. So right about this time, in 1958 or so, Mao's feeling pretty good. He's feeling pretty confident in everything they've accomplished in the last 10 years, at how well China was doing economically, at how the people seemed to be on board with the program. Things were running as well as he really could have hoped. So he decided it was time for the next period, in my opinion, of the Mao era, and that was the Great Leap Forward. They wanted to make this big quantum jump. They knew that it was going to be a big step. What they really wanted was to match or exceed the West, the United States, Britain, France, all the Western countries. They wanted to get to the part where they were an equal player economically on the world stage, okay? They knew they didn't have the infrastructure or the overall education or technology to do it, but what they did have was vast amounts of manpower to throw at it. They thought if they get everyone behind, if they get behind this idea, they get them all working towards the same goal, they have enough people, they can make it work. They can do this huge leap in a couple years. So they started. They collectivized the farms and industry. They had big goals for steel production and food production. And for the first year, it looked like it was working. Yields were up phenomenally. There was more food than ever before. People were working on making steel. That was a little behind, but it was improving. Everything was just coming up roses, they thought. Well, they didn't understand that there were some fundamental problems agriculturally with planting that much more, or putting the plants that close together. Okay, yes, the first year you got a lot more rice, you got a lot more grain, you got a lot more of everything, but it depletes the soil faster. it wasn't a good plan. Collectivization has not always worked. So it didn't work great in the Soviet Union all the time. It certainly didn't work for them. First year was great. Second year, the yields were lower, but nobody really wanted to admit they were lower. They didn't want to get in trouble with the government. So they kind of lied. Next year, they did the same thing. The yields were even lower. They were getting lower and lower instead of bigger, but they would say, oh no, it was a little better than last year. Before long, there's a huge food shortage. There is some argument as to when the government and Mao figured this out, and when they did figure it out, whether they acted to resolve the situation fast enough or whether they just were a little callous about it and said, no, we need to have this rice for trade. The end result was that millions, tens of millions of people died. The most recent number I saw is a historian put it up at 45 million people died as a result of the Great Leap Forward. A lot of this was starvation. And that number may be high. Previously, I had heard 35 million. But either way, that's a lot of people. Most of them died of starvation, malnutrition, the diseases that run rampant when you don't have enough food, things like that. A lot of them, a couple million at least, were killed when they wouldn't go with the program, when they kind of rebelled against this idea. It was a mess. It was horrible. Wiped out huge segments of the population. It was just a miserable failure. And that really led to the next stage, the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution. First, I'm going to kind of say what happened here, and then I'll give you some ideas as to why. Okay, so mid-60s, after the Great Leap Forward, they're starting to recover. They're trying to figure out what the heck happened. With so many people dying that we didn't have food, what happened? Well, so they're trying to reorganize. Mao actually stepped down as being the president of the country. He was just the chairman of the party at this point. And there's a big rally that happened in Tiananmen Square. There was a lead up to this, but the real tipping point was in Tiananmen Square. I think it was August 18th, 1966. Big youth gathering. Millions were in the square. And he told them that the thing to do was essentially to rebel and tear it all down. He said they should go and bombard the headquarters, party headquarters. They should look and see that was who isn't filled with revolutionary fervor, and they should either re-educate him or get rid of him. Mao essentially started another revolution against the government that he had helped build. It was horrible. It erupted in many cities, essentially devolved to civil war. It was the people who really were the actors in this were the Red Guard, and they were youth. They were students. They were laborers. They were low-ranking party members. It was the youth he went after, and they went nuts. They would go through, accuse people, anybody who was, older establishment, who was in a position of authority, anyone who told them anything they didn't like, they would accuse of being counter-revolutionary or rightists or reactionaries, and either beat them or send them to a prison or kill them. It went crazy. It went on this way until, I believe it was in 1969, Mao finally got the army to act. He called the army out to go through and bring order once again to China. He actually went so far as to a lot of these Red Guard students that were running amok in the cities, he forced them all out into the countryside to go learn how to farm, go get back to your roots. He broke them all up. It was insane in a lot of ways. Now, okay, why did he do this? There are some arguments there. There are a lot of different opinions. One is that he genuinely believed this was the way. Part of his doctrine was a continual revolution, that was the only way. The theory was, when people would have the revolution and the people who revolted came into power, they would slowly settle into the same exact systems, or they would covet their power and hold on to it the same way the original people did. And the only way to do this is to keep having revolution until everybody gets educated to the point where they don't do this. Okay, maybe he really believed that. If so, I have to say, I think it's a little naive and delusional. What you were really promoting there is pure anarchy. Okay, that was one idea. Another idea, and one I personally subscribe to a little more, to be honest, is after the Great Leap Forward, people did not believe that Mao was all that. They realized he was fallible, that he made mistakes. The Great Leap Forward was a huge mistake. And he lost a lot of his power and political clout because of this. I don't want to be cynical, but I think a very strong motivator for this is it tore up the established government and party hierarchy. It created anarchy. And the person who came out of this in charge was Mao once again. Everybody else was once again subordinate to Mao after the Great Cultural Revolution. Or during it, shall we say. There is another theory that has recently, or more recently, been put forward based on medical evidence, and his private doctor kind of forwarded this. Some believe Mao, due to medical reasons, may have been actually starting to go insane and become very paranoid, which contributed to this. And that's possible. I don't know. I am not going for any medical reasoning here. I do lean towards it was a paranoia and fear of losing power that caused this. Anyway, it went on. It slowed after 69, but the revolution kept taking place, and they kept kind of witch hunting anybody who wasn't fully on board with Mao and his ideas. And there were a lot of people imprisoned, executed, re-educated during this time. There was a lot of chaos. In hindsight, the Communist Party in China now has looked back and said, yeah, the great cultural revolution, the great proletarian cultural revolution, was a mistake in a lot of ways. They haven't fully denounced Mao, but they kind of give him the 70-30 bias. 70% of what he did, said, and his decisions were really good. 30% were not good. Take that for what you will. Okay, that's been a lot for one video. I think we're going to end it here. I may have to come back to more details on the Cultural Revolution later. It was an interesting, crazy period of time. But for now, go outside, get some exercise, do something fun, and I will talk to you later. Bye.